Welcome, everyone, for our Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers webinar series. Today, we have an exciting topic with Rose Wilson and Annie Harlow about understanding wholesale distribution options. Annie is a consultant across Vermont with tons of experience and works across the supply chain with different types of growers. And Rose Wilson is a business planning and marketing consultant that works actually nationally now. And we also just learned a amazing Nordic skier. So thank you both for joining us and working with us. This webinar is part of a larger grant that was written in collaboration with the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association to fund work with both of you. And it's through the Vermont Agency of Agriculture Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program. Sorry about that. I just lost there we go. And the other events we will post in the chat and talk about later, but, and you might have seen them listed on the listserv. There's a forum on March 10th. That's an in-person one, which will be lots of fun in Randolph. And then another webinar at this same time in 2 weeks, Introduction to Produce Safety for Wholesale Markets. And then a tour, very exciting, of Deep Root Growers Co-op Warehouse and Footbrook Farm and West Farm. So not to be missed. And with that said, I'm going to stop my screen sharing and let you take it from here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. Yeah, Rose and I are here today to cover a number of pieces of information to expand your understanding of market channels and distribution, which is a little bit different than if you're using farm stands and CSAs and farmers markets. So the distribution has its own set of variables that we're going to cover. And we've put this together to be an overarching summary. And Rose and I work together on a number of projects, and we recognize that every one of these slides that we have today could be its own webinar with a deep dive. So we want to kind of lay that out right now so that you understand that there's a lot to learn in working with different types of distribution and different types of sales. So Rose, why don't you take the lead now, and then we'll bounce around just so you know that we have lots to share, and we hope it's clarifying for you in some manner. So let's go, Rose.
Awesome. Thanks, Annie. All right. So we started this workshop with the thought of kind of an introduction to wholesale. So we're assuming that most of the audience is not actually already doing wholesale or is new to wholesale. And we're going to start with the basics. So the big thing to think about is, how is it going to impact your farm? There's a lot of different ways that wholesale can impact your farm. It's not just another revenue channel, but there's a lot of aspects of it, both from a logistical and a financial perspective, that might make it a good option for your farm, or it might not be a good option for your farm. And that's why we kind of want to talk about these before people get into wholesale, so that you can make an educated decision as to whether it's going to be good for you. There's some capital improvements that might need to be made. There's operating expenses that might change. There's the distribution and logistics component. Can you actually get access, and can distributors actually get to your farm? There's food safety questions. There's customer service. So what is the product? Is the product the actual product, or is the product the customer service that you're offering? There's the cash flow. So it might not just be about, is the opportunity profitable, but it's about the timing of when you're getting paid and when expenses come due. And then there's the income, which is, when you put this all together, is it profitable? Does it make sense for you to move forward? So these are the key topics that we're going to walk through. And like Annie said, any one of these could be a discussion in and of itself. So we're going to start by doing an overview. And if we have time, we will walk back through, we'll kind of circle back and forth and Annie and I will bounce off each other with thoughts on what to consider for each of these topics. So to start with, we're going to go with capital, the big thing, because the question first is, do you have all the infrastructure you need? And if not, what infrastructure do you need? What's it going to cost? And where's that source of capital going to come from? So the types of things that you might need to think about. Do you have a wash and pack facility? Does that wash and pack facility meet GAP standards? Do you need to meet GAP standards? Um, do you have cold storage? Do you need cold storage? Do you need a walk-in cooler? Do you have loading docks? Do you need loading docks? Does your driveway support truck access? Do you actually need to physically improve the driveway? Do you need refrigerated vehicles? Do you have refrigerated vehicles? All of these are just examples of the types of things that you might need. And so then the question becomes, if you've identified that you do need them, speccing out what they're going to cost, and then speccing out where that capital is going to come from. If that capital is going to come from a lender, then we also have to look about your capacity to support debt service. So again, that will be information that will then factor into your financial planning analysis. Annie, do you have some thoughts on capital that you want to mention?
I think right now, let's kind of park that, because I think you've really done the superficial covering of that, and it is really important to recognize. I love the way you phrased it, though. Do you need it? This element, and do you already have it, or do you need to expand on it? And within the different types of, and we'll get into this deeper, but there will be different types of parameters that you have to look at for the different types of buyers that you're considering. And that's a really big piece that we will have some touch points on, because that does and can impact your capitalization and understanding the money piece of your farm.
So then similarly, once you know if you have the capital infrastructure that you need, we have to take a look at how is your operation going to possibly need to change in order to support wholesale. Wholesale buyers are picky, very picky. We're just gonna say that right up front. And so what are the type of things that we need that we might not need when we're doing direct to consumer sales? Do we need to adopt new packaging standards? Do we need UPC codes? Do we need to be certified by any types of organizations? Do we need traceability and food safety standards that we're not already adhering to? With our storage, are we scaling up? Do we have increased utility usage? So impact on electricity, impact on water usage. How are you distributing the product? Do you need packing crates? Do you need to factor in the cost of access to this sales channel? So if you're delivering the product, now you're adding more miles on your truck. Do you need a truck driver? Are you accounting for your own labor? If you are using a third party like Food Connects, are you accounting for the fact that you now have freight charges? If you are selling through a distributor, are you accounting for the fact that there's a distributor margin worked into the wholesale price that you now need to offer? So again, thinking about where are the expenses in servicing this sales channel impacting your bottom line and making sure that you account for them. Do you need a new point of sale system? Do you need an inventory management system? Have you thought about the impact to shrink? This is a big one because shrink can be a little bit of a hidden expense, and it's really important when you're factoring in your wholesale pricing that we're looking at we may produce 100% of the product, but we might not actually be selling 100% of the product. There might be waste at the farm, there might be waste at the point of distribution, there might be waste along the way. Who is accounting for that waste? If it's going to come back to you, making sure that you've budgeted that into your pricing. Increase sales, marketing, and overhead expense. Again, We know that wholesale buyers are picky, so they might need a lot more hand holding than you're used to. Do we have staff on board to do that hand holding? Do we need increased liability insurance? So are there expenses with respect to office sales and management that we need to factor in? And then again, once you take all of those aspects on the expense side, how does that impact the the cost of production and overhead to the farm? And we'll see what Annie has to say on that.
Yeah, this slide could be an hour in itself. One of the things I like to remind people, especially if you're just looking at distribution as a new market channel, is that each one of the people that you intend to engage with to purchase your product is its own business that has its own operating expenses and its own method of operation. And so it's important to look at any type of this next step into distribution is really understanding who you're trying to sell to, because those operating expenses can be very different working towards selling to some small local stores in your area as a first step that you might do. They might be very, very different than trying to get into, say, a large co-op that you feel would be a great avenue for your product. So it's important to understand the stepping stones of operating costs as you explore the different market channels within distribution. So the small store can have a lot of different criteria than a larger store. And that, again, is a point that can be carried through pretty much every one of these slides as well. I think that's what I have to say on operating expenses right now, that there's not one single way to interpret the scale differential between
Yep.
your potential markets.
On that note, I didn't make a slide for it specifically in terms of like the logistics, but it can impact operating expense, and it goes back to that shrink factor in a way, is production standards. So understanding that when you're growing for wholesale, the expectation of the product to pretty much be replicated day in and day out. The carrot needs to be the same size, same width, same product quality. So it's very different from when you're growing direct to consumer, and you can pretty much choose what you're giving to the consumer. In this case, the buyer tells you what you need to adhere to. And so again, if you're not used to that, and if you're not used to having product that is of a consistent quality or consistent look and feel, you might have a lot more shrink as you get into that mode. So taking that into account as well is really understanding that when you get into wholesale, it becomes a lot more about not necessarily the taste of the carrot or the uniqueness of the carrot. It's does it meet the packing specs and the quality specs for that store to put it out on the shelf. Um, and so that's a logistical thing that you need to think about in addition to how it impacts your potential expenses. Alrighty. This one is a tricky one. It's really interesting when people say we want to get into wholesale, but then we start looking at, well, where are you located on the map? And how are you going to get that product to your wholesale accounts? And in the end, is the cost of getting it where it needs to be actually making you any more money than working through your other direct to consumer channels? So, first off, thinking about how is the product going to get there? Are you going to be the one driving it? Do you need to go through a freight shipper? Do you need to go through a distributor? If you need to go through other outlets, the first step is even finding out if there's an outlet willing to work with you. Initially, people will be just assuming, okay, I'm ready to go to wholesale. I'm going to go get those accounts. Well, the accounts must need to want to work with you. So step one is if you do need to go through a freight shipper or distributor, finding out if there's distributors who want your product and who are willing to work with you. Because the whole idea might go upside down if you don't have somebody that's willing to work with you. So, step one is just finding out if they're willing to work with you and or if you're planning to distribute yourself. Then the second thing is looking at the logistics of servicing the accounts. So whether it's the distributor or the freight shipper's schedule, or whether it's your buyer's schedule, do you have the capacity to meet those expectations? When do they expect to be able to place their order? How much do they need to know about what's available? When do you have to pack and ship that order? Um, do you have specific times in which you have to be at somebody's loading dock? And can you meet those times? If you are going to have your own truck, what happens if your truck breaks down? What is your fallback? They don't expect you to just call and say, oh, my truck broke down. They expect you to still deliver the product. So again, thinking about the production schedule and the delivery schedule and making sure that regardless of what method you're using to get the product to there, that it will be able to arrive when it's supposed to arrive. And then getting that question about how do the products need to be packaged? Do they need to be in certain size bunches? Do they need to be certain bunches to a box? Do they need to have a UPC code? How do they expect to be stored? Do you need to maintain cold chain supply? That's a really big one. If you do have products that need to be refrigerated, and you have to be able to demonstrate traceability from point A to point C as to whether the products have in fact maintained their cold chain minimums. So these are just the logistical components that then also tie back to, are there expenses associated with those that we need to factor in? And then working with your buyers to find out if they have specific delivery expectations. We do have distributors who refuse to come if you don't have a loading dock. They may refuse to come if you don't have a paved driveway. So just understanding what your buyers require before going too far into assuming that people are ready to work with you. Thoughts on that, Annie?
Oh boy, this is a 2-hour slide. I want to go down right now to the fourth bullet point, which is product packaging and getting it ready for quote distribution. Again, depends on who that target audience is that you're selling to. But I think if you're a small scale grower looking to go into a different type of selling that's not direct to consumer, it's really important that you recognize that there is a language to produce, and large buyers and actually any produce buyer learns the language, and that's basically centered around pack sizes. It could be a 24 by 2, that means 24 bags of 2-pound carrots in a case. So that's kind of some standard. The USDA has a website with all sorts of their what would the right word be, kind of like credited standards that are used throughout the produce industry. So if you're looking to really expand beyond that direct to consumer, it's kind of important to understand that there is a language to produce, and there are USDA guidelines to represent the different sizes for produce, thinking apples as an example. And then circling back to the distribution piece, it ties into customer service because it's all about the relationship. And you alluded, Rose, earlier to this is a relationship business. You're going to lose some relationships, and you're potentially going to gain others by upholding the standards and expectations of your new relationships with your buyers, say produce buyers at a store. And the shrink piece that ties into logistics can be pack out differences from what you send to your direct to consumer, your farm stand. So the product that a buyer needs to to maintain the integrity of what they're trying to put out on their produce stand, you've got that covered. But those other pieces might go back to your direct to consumer, to your farm stand. So you can have a different outlet. Sometimes that does circle back into increased production to make sure that you have the size of land to meet the distribution. So it's kind of a two-pronged thing, a little bit of chicken and egg. Are you trying to meet an existing customer base with a produce buyer, or are you trying to expand an existing one or create a new one? And so understanding what that expectation is really important, and that circles into the pack size as well as customer service, as well as things like cold chain delivery, windows of opportunity in terms of when somebody expects your product. So these all kind of feed off of all the slides together, but I just taken it from that perspective right now, that there is a language to learn, and it's a fun part of produce. So if you lean into new markets, it is really fun, actually. So I'll leave it at that. I know I got a little tangential there, but maybe it helps.
No, that's wonderful. And actually it made me think too. Again, so I'm all about the numbers. I'm always about the numbers. I just want to make sure that you're successful. So one thing that does happen, if you don't meet that window of opportunity, they often will not accept the product. They're not going to let you just sit there at the loading dock until somebody else unloads. They've got other things loaded up, so they just refuse the product, and then it's up to you to eat the shrink. So again, there's shrink that you can assume and budget for, and then there's shrink that you just need to budget for because things might happen. If the truck does break down and then you get there 2 hours late and they say that they're not accepting it, that entire truckload, you've got to figure out what you're going to do with. So trying to anticipate, what I like to just remind people of is we don't have to worry that the sky is falling, but we just have to be aware that these things might happen. And how does that impact your bottom line? If it does, can you support the fact that you might have an entire truckload that's now written off, that you thought you had a home for, that you thought you were going to get paid for, and now you don't? So where is that product going to go? And the other thing that gets a little interesting, and Annie mentioned it, was, okay, all your grade A product is now going to wholesale, and now you're going to give all your direct-to-consumer products your grade B product. Are you sure that your direct-to-consumer product, consumers want your grade B product? And are they going to start to notice that they're getting the seconds? And so you have to be very soft with how you deal with that. So yes, you can use your farmers markets and your CSAs. I work with a lot of farms who say their CSA is where they stuff the crap, but those people are paying a premium. You do not necessarily want to lose those customers because they're your best customers. So understanding that it's a dicey balance that you want to play there between how much you're using your direct to consumer, where you can control the quality of the product they're getting, with just making sure that they don't feel like they're getting the short end of the stick when they're actually paying you the premium price for your products.
I've got one more thing to add to this 2-hour slide. And that is sometimes going from kind of that direct to consumer to the next step, might be that you are looking at freight shipping, where that is where you are moving the product through the system. And there's a point where you own the product, somebody's moving it, and somebody's buying it, but who owns it if something goes awry? If that truck doesn't arrive on time and that store says, no, there is a cost to that. And it's really important. It might be through a food hub, such as Farm Connects, that does some freight. It might be through another distributor that just does freight shipping for farms to access new markets. But it's important to understand that there's a loss of touch point. It's beneficial, but it's also fragile. And I think that circles back to that money piece or that shrink piece or that relationship piece. Freight shipping is very valuable, but it also just has a level of concern if something does go awry. So I just like to mention that.
Yeah, and in general, just like when you're using FedEx to ship something, if it doesn't arrive in the time frame that it said they thought it would, they do not take responsibility. In general, the freight shippers will not take responsibility. At best, they'll agree with you to split it 50-50. But in general, if your product didn't get there when it was supposed to get there and their trucks are normally scheduled to get there, you need to budget for kind of eating that cost. So again, it's just something to be aware of. If they're willing to work with you on it, awesome. You can certainly bring it up and say, "Hey, look, this wasn't our fault. Are you willing to like, you know, eat this?" But in general, they won't. And if you're lucky, they'll even like with the food hubs, they can't afford to be eating um lost lost cause, lost orders either. So they're doing their best. They're doing what they said they would do, which is to try to get your products there on time. But generally, in all of the fine print, there's no guarantees, and you'll still be on the hook for the fact that the end buyer doesn't pay you for that product that didn't actually get there when they said it needed to arrive. So, um, please also note if there's folks that have questions, definitely put questions in the chat and we will address them. So as they're coming up in the topics, feel free to add questions because we want to make sure that it's interactive while we
Yeah,
scoot
Rose,
along.
there are a couple of questions from Hans. I don't know if Hans, you want to unmute and ask or hold it till the end, but
Yeah, Hans, let's have you jump right in. I think this is timely.
Yeah, thanks for this. It's great. I guess this may be relevant or timely, which is just having to do when you using its sort of definition of wholesale. You have gotten into wholesale and speaking of it, and I know you're talking about a whole range. Many growers I've worked with have been really kind of, I would say, toe in the door, 10-20% wholesale. They're mostly doing retail, but they work with a few smaller restaurant buyers or something, and we don't even really call that wholesale in the traditional, like from the FSMA perspective, but it's an important outlet. And it's either like when they have a surplus or they grow a few crops that they grow more than they know they need, or it might be they're intentionally doing it with a few, cultivating some relationships. So I was just wondering if either of you could speak to that, because that seems like a really common entry point for these kinds of buyers, where they'll just take on a few accounts, and it can be helpful in the larger production scheme because it can help equalize some ups and downs of production.
Wow, I love that. Thank you so much. And you're right, Hans, because many growers will reach out into a wholesale relationship with a restaurant, and that is often, not exclusively, but often can be very very much tied to their community, and that's a value in that learning curve and that stepping stone of wholesale. Right now, everything that you said in terms of maybe expanding a particular crop or having just a banner year on something, it might be a small percentage of their actual sales, but it is an income stream, and it is an income stream that is relational, again, often to their community. And I think there are, as I said earlier, each one of these buyers is unique in what they are looking for, and they are unique in how they impact your cash flow and your business side as well. So as I said, that slide on distribution logistics is there's a lot to it, and it does circle back to production and skills of opportunity. Rose, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah.
Your production side and the business side that you've worked with, number of vegetable and berry growers?
Yep. So the wonderful thing about working with restaurants is that they'll generally like all of a sudden we have so primarily for those impromptu sales. So there's two things. One is certainly if you can work with a restaurant and you get on a standard schedule and you guys agree to, okay, we're going to provide you with potatoes, we're going to provide you with this many potatoes per week or what have you. But the beautiful thing about restaurants is that they generally are making up new menus. So if you have a bumper crop of something or you have this load of something that didn't sell, they can be that outlet for large volume impromptu opportunities. So they're unique in that way as compared to most other wholesale buyers that really want a specific designated quantity day in and day out, and because that's what's filling in their shelves. Additional people that can sort of take that role would be other farm stands. So if you're working with other sort of independents and similarly small stores, if you have some interesting product or you were able to, again, those are going to be those relationships that are really more tied to your community, uh, tied to people who have a way to get rid of something. We also have like food shelves are a good way to do that too. We have food shelves that would be willing to pay if you have product that, is going to be um, going to waste or so there's unique opportunities to do those large volume sort of impromptu sales. Caveats to working with restaurants is that the chefs are often the ones that are responsible, and the chefs have very high turnover. So you can expect to have a relationship with a restaurant, and then that very next year, that that chef is no longer there, and the relationship goes away. So oftentimes, what we recommend is that when you get a relationship with a chef, follow that chef. So the chef might not be at that restaurant anymore, but wherever they are, they still have a relationship with you. So don't lose your relationship with the chefs. Follow your chefs. Because once they like working with you, they will bring their relationships with wherever they go, and that's where they become a benefit to the restaurants they work with. That's one of the things that they're pitching their food, they're pitching the quality of their cooking, but they're also pitching the relationships that they're bringing to the table. So that's really important to remember. The other big thing to remember when you're working with the restaurants is really assessing the cost of distribution, because if you're just going to one restaurant and you're making this delivery, how far are you going and what's that cost for the impact to the per unit cost of the products that you're selling? So just making sure, again, similar to whether you're assessing going to a farmer's market or whether you're assessing servicing other wholesale accounts, if you're only going to be driving out to one store or one restaurant, what is the distance and what is the volume that you're bringing, and does that make financial sense? And if it doesn't, then you try to start tacking on other things. And that's where we go into that feasibility side of things of like, okay, well, what can we do to make this work? But absolutely, getting a toe in the door with restaurants. Restaurants are a bit more forgiving, and they're able to work with product that has a short shelf life, or also product that is seconds. They actually don't need the grade A, and they prefer not necessarily to get the grade A because they don't want to pay for it. But because they're immediately going to cook it and they're going to prepare it, they can hide the blemishes. So they're happy. They're another outlet, again, strategically thinking about where you can go with different types of products. They're a great resource for using some of the product that wouldn't necessarily be able to go to your other wholesale accounts. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Hans?
Um, that was a great answer. Thank you. And yeah, I think that cost benefit of are these accounts worth it? I think the relationships are really key. And trying to make them leaning towards more predictability in time, which can be good for both the restaurant and the grower, and especially if the grower is going to move more into wholesale, that toe in the door can start opportunistically and it can grow and solidify with more sort of regularity. in time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those are great points. Thanks for bringing that up, Hans. Which leads us right into food safety, which is also part of Hans's wheelhouse.
Yes, absolutely. So Hans, we expect you to pipe up for this. Um, so over the years, we've definitely noticed an increasing need for food safety, and Hans has been great at spearheading the effort for our small diversified farms to be able to effectively get into wholesale without breaking the bank on food safety protocols and GAP certification. So first and foremost, understanding the level of the buyers that you're working with. If you're working directly with a restaurant, they might not require anything of you. If you're working directly with an independent store, they might not require anything of you. If you're working with buyers in any sort of institutional setting that have at-risk populations, whether it's childhood education or healthcare, they might have safety requirements in order, food safety, in order to ensure, again, it goes back to their liability concerns. They want to make sure that the children that they're feeding or the sick and infirm people that are in their care are not going to be at risk from the food that they're bringing in. And so double checking what the food safety requirements or parameters are with the buyers that you're working with. The other component of that is if you are working with chains, so even if you have a connection with the local Shaw's or the local Price Chopper or the local Hannaford, they might still have to adhere to their larger headquarters food safety protocols. So understanding the food safety protocols and then seeing if you can meet them. And some of the buyers might not require them. Some of the buyers might allow you to do some of these alternative GAP certifications. And then once you know what requirements you need to adhere to, again, going back to that capital component, are there any capital improvements that need to be made? So if your wash and pack shed is in your old dairy barn and it's got exposed raw wood and straw on the floor, do you need to make changes? Do you need to put in a cement floor? Do you need to put in white washable walls? Do you need to have drainage? All of these type of things. And then if so, what are those going to cost? And can you support that again for the volume that you're trying to do? If you're trying to just do one-offs to the local store when you have a bumper crop of something, is that investment going to pay for itself? Um, Annie and Hans, I'll have you guys both chime in. So Annie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think again, food safety is a deep dive. And I'm going to say that there's a lot of different ways to kind of parse this out. And some of it is product handling at the farm and your post-harvest setup, which you just kind of alluded to in terms of the being able to have a clean and sanitary wash pack area. Another element of food safety is also just maintaining that cold chain. I think that's really important. And then from the buyer expectation side, they are anybody that is purchasing your fresh produce is interested in having a longevity attached to that. So it kind of leans into food safety, but it also kind of goes back to the what is the expectation of the buyer. Food safety circles back into food traceability. That again, that's a whole day. Hans, let's organize something there. But I will say, meeting buyer expectations is super important, and having clarity as you build your relationship with any of your methods of distribution away from your direct to consumer is valuable to your operation. And actually on March 18th, another webinar in this series where Hans and I are going to, and Emily Reese and I are going to have touch points on trying to meet buyer expectations and food safety. And again, there's a lot to cover in this arena, but we want you take away that, just like in how you decide to literally move your food through your system, you have to literally understand some of the parameters and expectations that different types of buyers are going to have, and whether they're governed by a larger umbrella organization, as you alluded with the supermarkets. Hans, do you want to chime in here? Because I know this really is your wheelhouse, not only from the farm, but helping farmers meet the expectations of buyers. We welcome you.
Thanks again, both of you guys. I'm not, because we're doing this thing in a couple of weeks, I think I shouldn't say much at all here. I think that was a good overview. The only thing I would add is it's doable. A lot of people get scared by this. And it has a lot to do with procedures, standard procedures to mitigate risks. You're not trying to get rid of all risks, you're trying to minimize it. And even from the buyer's side, there's, I wouldn't say fear, but they need to check a box. And if it says you need a certain type of audit, maybe you could use another kind of audit. Like there's ways to work with that. And I think it's good to have a produce safety plan that builds confidence. So I think I'll end there and just say, come back on the 18th if you want to learn more.
We'll be here. I think, but Hans, that's a great lead into the next slide, Rose, which is the customer service, because ultimately our buyers are going to be, all of this is part of customer service and recognizing that. So let's just move to that next slide and cover these pieces of customer service, which is inclusive of everything when you're working with a buyer.
Totally. So two things on that. Absolutely. And Hans nailed it when he said that everybody gets kind of scared. Like, that's the thing. It's this whole liability piece, and everybody wants to pass the buck on who's going to be liable if something bad happens, and nobody really wants anything bad to happen. So that everybody's kind of just checking boxes. So absolutely, once you find out from your buyers what they need, the very next thing you do is call Hans. So make sure that everybody has Hans on their Rolodexes, because you want to be able to assess whether you can do it. And there's many different ways. And that's one of the things that Hans and Ginger worked so hard on, was finding ways to make wholesale accessible for our smaller scale farms. So don't shy away just because your initial discussion was told you have to do XYZ and that sounds impossible. First, check in and see if there's possibilities to meet those needs, and if you need to make modifications, what are the things that you can offer to pitch back to your buyers? Because at the end of the day, again, they want to work with you, but they do need to check these boxes. So that is basically, we'll go to the customer service side of things, which is exactly kind of what we're talking about, which is being able to meet your buyer's needs. So meeting your buyer's needs, the buyer in this case is no longer the end user. You are pitching your products to the store buyer or the distributor or the restaurant chef or the restaurant owner. Those are your buyers. Their needs are what becomes central to whether they're going to work with you or not. And their needs typically start to not become about the product, but about, can you adhere to the level of service they need? Can you get the product to them when they want it? Can you meet their price points? Can you meet their product specs? Can you meet their safety specs? Those are the things that are important to them. Much less so, does the product taste good? Is the product heirloom? Is the product grown locally? Those are side benefits that they then weigh in once you can meet things like cost, delivery schedule, volume, safety specs. The other thing that is really important to note is that these buyers work on a very immediate and urgent nature, so they don't they expect you to respond if they reach out. They also expect you to be the one reaching out to them. They are not going to follow up if you pitch a product to them and you're waiting to hear back from them. You need to be the one doing the outreach. You need to be the one pushing the relationship because we have to realize we're very, very small in the amount of relationships that they're dealing with. They have a lot of relationships, and we are the smallest thing on their list of people to remember to talk to. So it's not that they don't want to get back to you, it's that literally they are expecting you to be the one pushing the relationship forward. So being able to realize that you, A, need to be pushing the relationship forward, and being able to recognize that they do expect responses in a timely fashion. They expect responses. They want to be communicated with. If there's an issue with the order, if there's an issue with being able to fulfill the volume, they would rather know that up front than have no communication. So again, whether you've got good information to share or bad information to share, they want that information and they want to know it as soon as you've got it available to share. So realizing that the product that you're pitching when you're pitching to wholesale is not necessarily the product that you grow, but the service with which you can supply that product. It's the level of service that is actually going to be what wins you the deal.
Dang,
Andy?
that's good. That's good, Rose. I like that. I think everything that we've been saying is circles into customer service, and we're going to be running tight on time, and I really want us to get into this impact on cash flow, which does circle back to this relationship through customer service. So can we advance through? Because I want you to be able to share the calculator.
Calculator. Yes.
Because that can help frame for some people the difference between their control over their pricing direct to consumer versus through different distribution and wholesale. So let's look at cash flow and then move into income and then just wrap it up because we've only got like less than 15 minutes.
So recap, customer service supersedes product when you're pitching to your wholesale audience. Cash flow is critical, and cash flow has actually turned many of our farms upside down once they started to work with wholesale because we didn't anticipate how long it actually takes wholesale buyers to pay you. And actually, they use that as a point of leverage because oftentimes, if you look at their contracts, they say, well, we're willing to pay earlier, but we're going to dock points off. So, if we pay you within 10 days, we get a 2% deduction or what have you, which goes back to point number 2, which is that they may ask you or offer credits. So you have to be paying attention to that when you're setting your pricing. So in general, wholesale accounts won't pay before 30 days. If you're lucky, they'll pay within 60 days. If you're lucky, they'll pay within 90 days. We have wholesale buyers, large wholesale buyers that don't offer to pay before 120 days. Like it's not unheard of. And if you're not aware of that, and if you haven't done your planning for that, you've got all of the expenses that went into producing the product. You've got all of your expenses that went into delivering that product, and you might not see a return to cover those for another 120 days. So you have to be anticipating where's your bridge financing coming from? Do you have startup capital that you're going to be able to use for operating cash in those in-between phases? Do you need to set up startup capital? If you don't have a line of credit, it would be highly advisable to look for a line of credit and make sure that you're basing the amount you need on how much volume you're anticipating selling and how long that lag time is going to be before you get reimbursed. And do realize that you can potentially expedite those terms, but there's likely going to be a cost to that of 2 to 4% off invoice, which means you send them the invoice for $100 and they write you a check for $96. So that's bullet number 2 is that they might ask for credits. And the things that they consider off invoice, and we can go on for hours about this because it's taken so many of our farms by surprise that we really like to hammer on it. But Payment terms is one that's a biggie. Shrink is another. Again, if they decide that they got a case of lettuce and they had to throw out 3 heads because they didn't think they looked presentable, they might deduct those from the invoice and they might only pay you for 9 of the 12 heads of lettuce that you sent. So you got to pay attention to shrink and who's paying for the shrink. They might also require you to participate in marketing, and or they might hide marketing as a shrink so that they get on average a 15% discount over the course of the year. Um, so they might ask you for product to go on sale. They might require you to have product to go on sale. But any of those will impact the price, and we're about to get into what is your price setting. If you've already set a 65% price to your distributor or your wholesale buyer, and then all of a sudden they're deducting these other things, you might not be able to support the 54% price that you're getting. So you need to just know what are the potential credits that they might be asking for, and can you support those? Um, and then also, what happens if you did grow all this product for somebody and then maybe they go belly up, maybe they're not around, maybe somebody else undercut you on price. Do you have a backup plan if you have a large scale of product that was identified as going to a particular buyer, and that's no longer happening? So those are some just key gotchas to pay attention to. Annie, anything on those key gotchas?
Yeah, I think some of it's a little like food safety. It can get a little scary. That the 30, 60, 90, payments, that I'm going to say that those really take place in the consumer package sector. Can be a little bit different in produce. We're not necessarily talking about, our audience right now is not exactly moving into that shipping of pallets through to the East Coast. We're looking at that incremental step, but it is super important to understand the impact of cash flow. And I learned a long time ago, and this is a really important point I like to drive home. It's not a sale until you have the money in the bank. So you have to do a lot. Sometimes a farmer has to do a lot of chasing to receive that accounts payable and accounts receivable, sorry. And I think it's really important to know that it can be a new element as you're expanding your market channels into these different distribution relationships, or these selling and wholesale relationships. It's not a sale till the money's in the bank. And if that's one thing you go home with, it's like, oh yeah. And to Rose's point, is it what you expected you were going to get paid? So yeah. And we have a really fun tool that Rose uses all the time to help us understand the actual products, kind of like the pack out and the pricing. And I think this is something that's really useful to understand. So let's walk through this, Rose, because a lot of people don't understand margin markup. Again, this is a 3-hour slide in 2 minutes.
Yeah, so we'll walk through this slide, and really quickly, going back to the Hans's note that a lot of you might be starting with a wholesale relationship with a restaurant. So the restaurant buyers may be more able, and your local stores may be more able to pay you promptly. You might actually get paid upon delivery, but those are really important things to find out. So ask them as you're starting those relationships, what do they expect the payment terms to be? Ideally, if you can ask for it, ask for payment upon delivery. That's really helpful. The other really important thing to remember about restaurants and independent grocery stores, as compared to the other chains, they are the ones that are more likely to go out of business. And if you're on their list of vendors that didn't get paid, you are not gonna get paid. So ultimately, as much as they're the ones that most likely might be able to pay you promptly, they're the ones that you definitely want to pay you promptly, because they are the most risky customers to work with. And again, you are going to be the lowest thing on the totem pole for them to pay if they're facing financial troubles. And we have a lot of farms that have a lot of situations that arise from that. So Quick note on that. So, and it doesn't have to be scary, especially if you're starting with those restaurants. You just want to find out what the payment terms are and try to make sure that they pay promptly. Income, when you're looking at pricing your products, the key thing that we want to remember is there are some industry standards, so they're very easy to apply. So if you see something on the shelf in a grocery store, doesn't matter what section of the food or beverage area, typically you can assume that the grocer paid 65% of that shelf price for the product. The grocers tend to reserve 35% for their margin, their gross margin, and that 35% is generally 30% for their overhead and 0 to 5% for profitability. They make very little profit. They operate on a low profit margin model. And so you can almost always work backwards from the price that you see in a store. If it was going through a distributor, then the distributor also tends to have an industry standard price at which they're purchasing the product. They tend to purchase it at 72% of what they then pitch it to the store for. So these are really important components when you're understanding if you are going to be delivering directly to the store, you have capacity to absorb that 28% margin. But the trick is, can you actually service that store for that 28%? Oftentimes, you'll find that it's cheaper to be getting the lower price, the 72% purchase price that the distributor is buying from you, than it is for you to try to service the account for that 28% margin. Because that's why distributors are in business. They're very effective at moving product. 28% margin is a very difficult margin to operate on, and typically distributors actually don't make money, which is why they'll start asking things for shrink and payment terms and marketing because they can't actually make money at 28%. So if you can make better money than they can, that's amazing. And also you might have to be your own distributor because they won't work with you. You're too small for folks to work with. So that's totally okay. But you just have to understand that whatever the account is that you're working with, they will likely be purchasing the product at 65% of the price that they would then anticipate selling it for. And so you have to be able to make sure that you can operate on that level. So if the shelf price for this product, this is an example, if the shelf price for the product is $2.14, that means that the store bought it for $1.39. If you're selling directly to the store, you can be selling it for $1.39. If you're selling it to a distributor, then you sold it for $1. And that's why oftentimes a grower will say, oh gosh, well, the store is doubling what I'm selling the product for. In a markup, they are. It's technically double, 54%. But in reality, they're still operating on a 65-35% margin model, which is industry standard. And the trick for you is whether you're selling it for $1 or $1.39, is that extra 39 cents sufficient for you to actually get the product from point A to point B? So that's where to do your math. And I think we're running towards the end of time. So the key thing to remember is at the 65% purchase price, when you factor in these potential other components, the shrink, the increased operating expenses, the other credits that the buyer might expect, the impact to infrastructure expenses, can you make the math work for you? Which is basically the wrap up to the slide. So it's both a financial question and also a logistical question. If they require loading docks and you can't put in a loading dock, then it's a moot point, and that's okay. We'll look for other ways to make your product move. So it's really just allowing you to make an educated and informed decision before hopping in and then finding out, wow, this is going to be more difficult or more costly or not actually profitable than I anticipated.
I would just add to that, again, this is an introductory talk about all sorts of different elements of distribution and wholesale. Every one of these slides could really be a deep dive. And I think it's really important that you're welcome to reach out to me. Rose, can you advance that slide just so that the contact's there?
Oh,
and,
quick plug for Annie's other upcoming workshops.
And I was just going to say, we have, go back one slide. We have 3 other events coming up, 2 in person, one next week in Randolph, Wholesale Forum, and then food safety type thing coming up on the 18th, also a Zoom. And then we have a warehouse and farm tour up in Johnson. And all of these tie into all of these elements of wholesale that we're talking about. And they represent different sizes of operations and different kind of constraints and opportunities for selling wholesale. And they're all farmer to farmer, as well as having a suite of business people and consultants helping you understand different aspects of wholesale. So to that, we're just over a little bit, Becky.
And I'll just, once again, I'm going to share our contact info. So if you guys need to reach out, definitely contact Annie. And then you've got Hans coming for the next presentation on food safety. And you can also always reach out to me as well. And I'll try to help answer any questions that folks have. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys. This is so important. There's great opportunities, and we just want to make sure that you're off to the right foot when you take a look at them.
Yeah, try to join in some of these other March Madness things. It's a really great use of our federal USDA tax dollars. That's my pitch.
Yeah, thank you both. You both are such wonderful resources, and we'll share when we post the webinar recording, we'll share some of these links and your contact if that's okay. And yeah, thanks for all you're doing to help growers. This is super informative. Bye, Vern. And yeah, we'll let everyone go. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, Rose.